You know, art can be kinda weird sometimes. Not only have so many people created many odd, intriguing works of art to analyze and look at, but even art itself, as a concept, is, weirdly enough, well, it's weird. To create something that isn't real, something that didn't happen and doesn't exist, is what I feel to be the essence of working on fiction. One piece of fiction that, at least in the past, took up a good chunk of my brain space is Toby Fox's 2015 indie RPG, Undertale. And what a weird piece of software that is! From its quirky aesthetic and sense of humor, to even its bold premise of allowing the player to spare pretty much every enemy in the game in ways that can drastically affect the story, there's no denying that Toby is one hell of a creative guy, to say the least. I must have been around 10, nearly 11 years old when I first really got into Undertale, around mid-2016. And at the time, I was absolutely enthralled by it. I was already an enthusiast of anything retro games related by that time, and seeing this cheap, easy-to-access, retro-inspired RPG that even had a fan-made Portuguese translation, and also was very much adored by most YouTubers I watched at the time, made me down for the idea of playing it. And holy moly did I ever play this game. I did 3 playthroughs to be precise, all in around a month and a half. They were all pacifist runs too, because I'm too much of a wimp to even consider killing a monster in this game. So it's not like I was seeing different endings or anything. I played the same exact RPG, back to back, 3 whole times. Let's just say that's not exactly something I would like to do today. After a while, this excitement did die down a bit. There are only so many fan comics, theories, and weird fanmade use that one can take before they become burnt out. Don't get me wrong, I still love the game, but the passion really wasn't the same as it was before. As the game grew more and more popular, it faced the fate that any huge fandom has to go through at one point or another, being considered too cringe and or toxic by a decent portion of the internet! And while nowadays, I think it's a stupid mentality to care about this stuff at all. I'm an enjoyer of all of these, independently of how the internet sees their fans. That whole impression did make me sort of avoid thinking too positively about the game for a while, which, surprisingly, wasn't all that bad. I mean, not only were the ironic memes somewhat funny, but that honestly did help me see Undertale in a more fair and critical light. The game was not perfect, even Toby Fox agrees. From the generally short length, to the basic visuals, to even the way it was written, the game screams loud and proud the fact that it was made by a small team on the internet. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, I don't think it deserves the best game of all time title so many people gave it back in the day. Jumping ahead a few years, let's talk about October 2018. That's when Deltarune Chapter 1 was suddenly shadow dropped online, which, to those uninformed, is basically a spiritual successor and alternate universe sequel to Undertale. By that time, my English was already very good, and I absolutely did not mind not having any kind of translation. So of course, when the game came out, I was very excited, and I played it as soon as I could, which meant I played it 1 or 2 days later alongside a friend at his house, since I didn't own a PC I could use for gaming at the time. Anyway, overall, I remember having fun with Chapter 1. And that's about it, honestly. I liked how it started to move towards a direction more akin to modern RPGs, as it now had multiple party members, as the combat visuals decided they didn't want to be Dragon Quest anymore, and went full-on Final Fantasy instead. Also, the game had this more stylish vibe which I really liked, but it's honestly kinda hard to explain. Something I found, well, interesting, was the new setting for the narrative. At the time, I didn't get why they decided to go with this sort of structure where you have the light world, aka the real world, and the dark worlds, aka the magical worlds where you go to fight monsters and do real crazy magic and stuff. I was familiar with many stories with a similar structure, but I didn't exactly get why Deltarune was taking such a path, other than possibly to invoke imagery reminiscent of Undertale's good ending. Something that also confused me about the game back in the day was the lack of multiple significant story routes depending on which enemies you spare, a feature that defined Undertale's whole identity and basically formed its thesis. So yeah, after watching the end of Chapter 1, I thought it was alright. Oh, and that cliffhanger! Mwah! It was so intriguing, even if by that point it was just that. Intriguing. In all honesty, at that point I didn't care enough about the characters to be actively worried about the implications of that finale. But I was indeed really curious about side implications and wondered where the story could go from there. Also, you may have noticed, I said watched the end, not played or got to the end. Well, that's because Chapter 1 turned out to be longer than me and my friend expected, and I had to get home before we could finish it. So I ended up just watching the rest of the important story beats online. You can sort of tell by this that I wasn't particularly excited to actually play the game all that much. or even to watch the entire rest of the game on a walkthrough or something. I mostly just wanted to be up to date with it all. Even when I got my own PC, and a while later, when the Switch version released, I didn't get around to beating either of them. Not the PC version, nor the Switch version. So, that was that. I had my fun with Chapter 1, was looking forward to the release of the second part, and well, I sure kept looking forward to it for a while. We all did. It took almost 3 years for the second chapter to be done, and mostly I was fine with that. I tend to be pretty chill when it comes to game delays, development hell, or even games that just take a long time to come out. I've seen enough reviews of Sonic 06 to know that rushing games out the door is usually not the brightest idea, and I'd rather have a great game later than have finished one now. This holds true even with games I'm more passionate about, such as Metroid Prime 4, as an example. So after Chapter 1 released, life went on, I got older, things changed, and by September of this year, I had already turned 16 years old. And while a lot of things in my life had improved since 2018, stuff got a bit hairy when it comes to my close circle of friends I've known since I was a child. As teenagehood really started hitting, things felt a bit different between us. The staggering majority of my friends are either going through issues of their own, and/or are just getting more interested in different, more typical teenagery stuff that I'm just not as into as them. And while I'm by no means trying to blame them for anything, they're just figuring out more things about themselves. And I still love them a whole lot despite all of this, but I just can't deny that I have been feeling a bit out of place with the group as of late. I've been finding myself just wishing to go back to when we would explore the town on our bikes nearly every day, when we all got into the same TV shows at around the same time as each other, and we would all play the same video games together, almost all of the time, instead of only sporadically, maybe, in some weekends, if they want to. I mean, I'm down for some Smash Brothers. Why aren't they down for some Smash Brothers too? It's just crazy how so many things can change in such a small time frame. I guess it's just part of growing up, but still. Sometimes I look back at 2017, 2018, 2019 even, and I think, wow, has it really been that long? Meanwhile, some of my friends tend to see 6th and 7th graders as almost literal babies for all the goddamn difference it makes. But I digress. Oh, right. I was supposed to be talking about video games, huh? Well, it was during September that the official Undertale 6th anniversary stream happened. And, I'll be honest, I didn't even watch it. I assumed there was gonna be nothing important in it, plus I was busy with some homework at the time. So, as the responsible little child that I am, I decided to focus on that instead. Gladly, as I was about to go to bed, I checked Twitter, and boom! Deltarune Chapter 2 had been announced, and it was just coming out 2 days after that. Even though I wasn't necessarily dying to play it, I was pretty excited. Of course I was gonna check it out. A few weeks after release. Long story short, I was busy during the exact time of release. I kind of forgot to play it for a little while after that. Stuff just got in the way, I think. Ironically, even one of my friends had played it before me. I mean, it's not like it solves anything. We barely talked about it either way. Deltarune was one interest in common that stuck around. I think I'm probably exaggerating this whole thing to some extent even, but I'm just describing how I feel, independently of how 100% accurate that is to what's actually happening in real life. Well, now that I think about it, he is one of the more chill ones. Maybe he'd be down for a one-to-one conversation soon. I'll try to schedule something. Maybe running on the beach will do? Yeah, sure, I'll send him a message. Anyway, when I finally got around to playing it, I was, as expected, having a ton of good old fun. All the new characters and dialogue were delightfully hilarious. The sprite art was very pretty, and I don't think I need to say anything about Toby Fox's music. Just listen, please. was going through my playthrough, having fun, laughing at the jokes, and to make a long story very short, there's a point in the story where you're hanging out around this chapter's Dark World alongside Noelle, another student in the main character's class, who's a stereotypical perfect girl. She's very kind and is an exemplary student. She's also kind of your childhood friend, even if using the term friend might be a bit of an exaggeration. She also has an adorable little crush on Susie, but that's besides the point. You hang around with Noelle, solve some puzzles, have the option to collect a banana, which leads to a genuinely really sweet moment between Queen and Noelle. And then, when you least expect it, this happens. Well, yeah, you could say this thing kinda touched me. Well, it'd be more accurate to say it left me not being able to think about anything else for the rest of that weekend. It may not seem like much. It is just some good character writing, after all. Besides, if you actually delve into it, you'll figure out that Noelle's motivation for being so nostalgic like this has to do with the loss of her sister, which is way more justified than whatever the hell I've been going through. There's this really good video by Daryl Talks Games that really delves into the character's psychology. He speculates that Noelle suffers from learned helplessness, which, while I can relate to the symptoms of to some extent, due to having generally, fluctuating self-esteem, it isn't something I'm sure I have. I don't think so. So, I'm not in any way trying to undervalue Noelle's character development by comparing to my own struggles, but I'd be lying if I said that moment didn't get me thinking about my issues. And I assume I'm not the only one. It's super normal to, while growing up, struggle to adapt to a constantly changing environment, or just wishing to go back to your earlier childhood for one reason or another. Such a thing results in very realistic character writing for a game of its kind. In fact, it excels at exploring issues that not only teenagers, but people as a whole, go through daily. As another example, there's our main character, Chris, whose brother's going to college has apparently affected them deeply. Even though it's mostly through subtext, since we are dealing with a silent protagonist here. I might not have dealt with an issue of this kind myself, but I do have at least one friend who has been struggling with the sudden leaving of a family member. And I'll try not to delve into the details too much, but let me tell ya, it's not pretty. Also, there are some implications that Susie might be very poor, to the point of having trouble with finding actual food to eat. This is not something that Undertale did all that well. While the game does have funny, compelling, and maybe even deep characters, it doesn't deal with this kind of, human issue that's almost exclusive to the society we have today. This is something that most fantasy RPGs deal with. The one big one I can think of that does something similar is the Persona series, with its interplay between high school social life and shadow-slaying action. King K made this great video about how Persona 4 does so, and how this affected his own life struggles. I highly recommend it. At that point, I finally understood why the game took place in an above-ground monster town. It wasn't just to remind you of Undertale's ending, it was so it could be a relatively more realistic story, where the characters go through struggles that are very common in today's world. The loss of a family member, loneliness, losing track of time, financial troubles, Even goddamn Birdley's backstory, which is played as a joke, has that element in it. While he's a completely self-centered jerk about it, he struggles with high expectations when it comes to his grades at school, even though he isn't as smart as people think. Or at least, he doesn't feel like he is. That is, well, something a lot of people can relate to. Believe me, I would know. I've been there. I could honestly see this game helping a lot of people who are going through similar troubles in their life. Just like how it sort of did me, and gave me a character who was sort of going through something similar to me, even if it was for honestly much darker reasons. While it is sort of a popular belief that relating to fictional characters is sort of something to be ashamed of, and that sometimes can be awkward to admit, there's nothing actually wrong with it. Finding a character you can relate to, especially when you're facing something really tough in your life, can be very comforting, and in more extreme cases can avoid, bad stuff from happening. So the way Deltarune develops his characters can only be a good thing, in my eyes. At least, in this particular instance, seeing what the game is trying to achieve. Back in September, in response to Chapter 2's positive reaction, Toby mentioned in a tweet how he's glad people are starting to see Deltarune as a different thing from Undertale, with its very own identity. And with noticing how Deltarune constructs its characters, I think it's now pretty easy to see how these games diverge from one another. Undertale is more of an analysis on how games work as a whole, with its multiple endings, fourth wall breaks, and even the way that it essentially punishes you for defeating monsters and getting EXP. It manages to be seriously heartfelt by the end, and you get to meet and hang out with its very likable characters as a reward for deciding to spare them. The game flourishes both through its non-linearity and the ability to analyze typical game structure from a different perspective. Meanwhile, Deltarune is almost frustratingly linear in comparison. It keeps making you think your choices matter, just to throw it in your face the fact that they don't. It does get a secret ending in Chapter 2, but the outcome ends up being mostly the same. But here's the thing. That's kinda the point. Deltarune is not meant to be this massive deconstruction of what a video game is supposed to be. It is meant to be, well, a video game. To be more precise, it's a semi-linear, character-driven RPG that decides to tackle real-world struggles through the perspective of teenagers. Depending on how the games might be connected lore-wise, their stories are going for very different approaches to very different topics. It was when this realization hit that I found myself in the same position that I was in 2016, spending hours of my life watching theory videos on a Toby Fox video game. I am once again a huge fan of these games, and I can't wait to play through Chapter 3 whenever it comes out. And, to end off, I want to share a moment with y'all. Well, you see, all this character construction has to go somewhere. And besides some nice character arc constructions, I think this game pays it off well with some nice character moments. Right at the end of the game, when you get out of the Dark World, just like in Chapter 1, you get the opportunity to explore the overworld town. This time, however, Susie is accompanying you. As I was playing that part, I was finally able to explore this town myself, and it felt, well, it honestly felt kinda comforting. Seeing these characters I've known since I was 10 years old again surprisingly got to me. Even though these are alternate versions of said characters, it was great to see them having mostly new happy lives. In a way, it almost did feel like Undertale's pacifist ending. It felt like, in a way, time also passed for them, as things changed for them. But they're also somehow still the same. Just like that, Deltarune uses its connections to Undertale to its advantage, and kinda makes the player feel like they're meeting up with old friends they haven't met in a long time again. I know I popped off when I noticed that random pair of royal guards from Undertale was there. All the personality-filled dialogue is comforting, in a way. This all accumulates when you finally decide to go home. Toriel ends up convincing Susie to help her make a pie and stay over for the night. As you go to the bathroom to wash your hands, and all the crazy story stuff is happening with your soul, you get to hear the really sweet dialogue between Susie and Toriel, where Susie is taught how to make a pie correctly. After that, you two just lay on the couch, talk about what's to come in the future, watch TV, and ever so gradually begin to fall asleep. This moment, this really silly scene with two friends who are just sort of hanging out, nearly made me cry. Just sitting down and spending some time with what almost feels like a friend. Just talking about stuff, sharing your views on something as stupid as kaiju movies. This is a feeling I haven't felt in a while. It's so infrequent nowadays, when nearly every friend meetup feels like a messy mix of typical teenage chaos and uncomfortable conversations about girls I don't know. You know, art can be kinda weird sometimes. Not only have so many people created many odd, intriguing works to look at and analyze, but even fiction itself, as a concept, is weirdly enough, well, it's weird. To create something that isn't real, something that didn't happen and doesn't exist, that is what I feel to be the essence of working on fiction. One piece of fiction that, right now, takes a good chunk off of my brain space is Deltarune. Because just as the characters were closing their eyes and beginning to fall asleep in the final cutscene, this ridiculous comedy got me to think, maybe I need more friends.